Hello, students. I've decided to break up the lectures for the last 2 weeks so that we're doing the children and adolescent materials in one session. So today we'll be talking about death by suicide and addictions and violence. So we'll go ahead and get started. I've already uploaded the PowerPoints that we'll be using. So let's get started. Okay, so question here is, and in all likelihood, the question is have you, your family, uh, your workplace, or church been touched by suicide? I notice also here we've got different means by which a person uh, completes suicide. And I hope you start thinking in language like this. When we say committed, uh, where it's a sort of accusatory word, and many people don't complete suicide, they attempt it. It's a small thing, but it also removes some stigma. So I don't know if you've come across these. There are different places where people have put a message. This is your sign. Don't kill yourself. Um, I've actually walked the Golden Gate Bridge. There are telephones where a person who is considering suicide can call to get help. And you see these type of messages all over the place. You also are seeing them around the country. Some people are painting rocks. I just think it's a beautiful thing. The question is, can something this simple help? And the answer, as usual with psychology, is it depends. But it certainly doesn't hurt, and it actually may cause someone to find that as a means to which they stop to think. Or it may cause a family member to say, I'm worried about this, but I'm going to do something. Now, this training that I'm talking about here, ASSIST, is actually a layperson's training. It's a 2-day, 2-trainer workshop, and it's designed for members of all caregiving groups, family, friends, other community members. It's a very effective approach, and it's intended not to be a counseling, but a means by which you prevent. So you actually have an outline of a conversation to have with the person who may be considering suicide. And it's just an incredible resource. It's very simple and accessible. I really recommend that you consider it, regardless of what your profession. Most likely, you will encounter someone, and if they are open enough to be talking about it or to drop hints, so to speak, those are means by which they're testing out um, the theory of, does anybody care for me? Is this something that I could do? And it'll allow you to have a conversation with the person. And if they're really not ready to take steps towards suicide, it can still give you some areas to discuss and have resources ready for a person that's considering this. So I hope you'll look into that. Suicide resources and services. This is the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. I think now it's the crisis line. Um, this actually needs to be updated. Centerstone is now returned to 7 counties adult crisis line. So yeah, I'm going to email you the update on this, but the phone numbers are the same. Acute child psychiatric services. If you're experiencing emotional crisis with a child, They're very good. I also recommend Bingham Child Guidance Center for children's counseling. Plus, the CU Well Clinic is equipped to do work with kids. There's the Veterans Crisis Line, and I think once a year they'll actually publish this, push this to the media. And then, of course, there's Norton Children's Hospital's ER, which is there to work with children all the way up to 18-year-olds. The Brook Hospital is, and I'm just going to say this, is the one place that I feel comfortable referring someone who is in crisis. I have referred folks in crisis to other places, hospitals in this community, and the Brook is the only one that has been effective and compassionate. I will call a particular hospital if you've got a client who has been admitted and maybe they're under a 72-hour hold. If they're lucky, they're very much about turning people back out, referring them out. But when I call, you get a number from the patient, the client, or family member that allows you to speak with your person. And I have called places and get this, yeah, what do you want? Well, I am, Miss Smith's therapist. I'm calling to check in on her. Well, I don't know. Let me check. Like it's horrible. Um, the second client that I referred to the Brook, the first one had an incredible turnaround with addictions. They do addictions treatment. They do treatment of all ages. This particular client was suicidal and in a very delicate place. And when I called the Brook and gave the number, they said, sure, if you'll just hold for a moment, I'll transfer you to the floor. Okay. I'm getting ready to get blasted by somebody on that floor. The nurse that they gave me said, oh, I'm so glad you called. She's been really upset and crying. Is there someone who can bring her some clothes? She's very upset. And I'm going, what? It was a world of difference. So there's where I refer. And so when I get people saying, oh, University of Louisville, okay, great for physical trauma, for psychological trauma, not so much. It's a public hospital, but if you can avoid it, avoid it. And of course, Peace Hospital, formerly Our Lady of Peace. I've also had some clients who probably should sue. So I'm just saying. So the Brook is a good place to go. Now, we also run into the issues with payment, that sort of thing. So the person is going to need insurance or some means to pay. That's the other, barrier. Our mental health care system in this country is deplorable because people who have resources typically aren't having as much trauma because they've got more resources to begin with. But whenever I can, I'm going to refer to the Brook. Here's psychiatric hospitals. You've got Central State, which is a public psychiatric hospital. I visited out there. It's very, 70s kind of construction and that sort of thing. But, when you've got somebody who doesn't have insurance and can't get in the Brook, that's the option you have. So I'm not familiar with the others, but these are regional areas. University of Louisville, we've already covered that. It's 24/7. They do actually have a psychiatric ER. They'll do the person's intake in the regular emergency room, and then they'll send them elsewhere. Again, I've already talked about my favorites. OLOP is now Peace Hospital. Okay, so when you've got someone who is suicidal, do overreact, do be intrusive. If they say it, it's time to act, even if they're just testing the water. Um, Suicide, um, it, going for help may not be an option when you're talking with them, but do everything you can to reach out to family, anybody who has a ministry, has a part in that person's life. You've got to partner with them, and the more help, the better. Um, so again, assist if you can do it, and there are a lot of places that training is free. Okay, why? Why suicide? If we review what Wright says about it, starting page 300, overwhelmingly is the unmet need for love and acceptance. So when you think about babies, many have heard the expression failure to thrive. There's an account of an orphanage, I believe somewhere in Eastern Europe, may have been Romania, where the babies were left in the cribs, except they had all their physical needs met. They had food, they had diaper changes, clothing changes if they soiled their clothing, but there was no hug, no love, no nurture, no rocking, no singing. And despite having the physical needs met, these children were dying. You're going to find the same thing happens with adults, with children and teenagers, that isolation, even though it may be overexposure on social media, it's still isolating. Also, times of trauma crisis, lost relationships. Teenage boys that have a breakup, very impulsive. Males complete suicide at a much higher rate than females because they choose very lethal means. Guns, hanging, whereas females will tend to choose something that won't mess up the place. I know that sounds so strange, but it's just true. They think about who's going to have to clean this up. Suicide can also be an act of desperation and attempt to control a relationship, or to try to escape. There's also deep shame when you've got trauma survivors, particularly sexual, physical abuse. It basically steals your identity. And of course, I've probably mentioned to you guys that child sexual abuse is considered soul murder. So you've got someone who already has a deep part of themselves so wounded. And rage is also a means, motivation for suicide. There's kind of a trite saying that I've read that depression is anger without the enthusiasm. You can see someone who tends to be very quiet, maybe even more than they normally were, and have internalized rage. And anger is a secondary emotion. So the secondary emotion, that is what we want to discover. There may be a rage about an injustice. There may be rage about grief. Why did they leave me? Secondary emotion is an emotion that overlays a primary. So we're talking about anger protecting the tender, fear, shame, sadness, disgust. So the question is, if there's rage, what is that armor covering? That's secondary emotion. What is the underlying emotion? Interestingly enough, depression, to receive a diagnosis of depression, you only need to be experiencing that for 2 weeks to meet the clinical criteria. Suicide can also be, and primarily is, it's not necessarily a desire to die. It is a desire to be released or escape pain. Uh, there's means by which there's revenge. The very first client I had as an intern, this husband was pretty likely to have borderline personality disorder, and he staged his home. He was angry with his wife who had left him, and he wrote nasty letters to all the people who had wronged him, set up the place the way he wanted it, went to the porch and called 911 and said there's a dead person on the porch at this address. And then he shot himself on the porch. Hopelessness. Look for patterns of hopelessness. When a person is stuck, and that's often a place where things never appear to be going to improve. And, scripture says hope deferred makes the heart sick. That is definitely true. Okay, here are some myths. Attempts and suicide are not the same. Attempts can be means by which to cry. When they say cry out for help, that actually can be a thing. People say, well, they're doing that to get attention. Well, yes, but remember when we talked about connection with humans, it may be a cry to someone see me, someone hear me, or someone help me out of this abusive relationship or this terminal illness or whatever. Suicide is different. And again, it is that means, but I can't do this anymore. I can't face this anymore. And interestingly enough, it's actually a means by which a person has some hope that, as bad as things are, at least there's a way out. And that's why you don't immediately want to say, oh, that's crazy. Don't think about suicide. What you're doing is saying, suicide's off the table. You've got nowhere to go. You're stuck. And this is where you got to refer to the professionals to work around that. Suicide is not exclusive to one population. It doesn't matter about ethnicity, race, class. It's just as prominent in that upper 1%. I don't know if you remember the story of Kate Spade, high profile fashion designer, lifelong struggle with depression and anxiety. And she had a lot of money, so she had plenty of resources, plenty of ways to help. Robin Williams, but all the way down to people who have no money and nowhere to go. Suicide is not hereditary. What we do find is that in a particular population, specifically, you see it very often in young people, suicide is not on a person's radar until someone else completes suicide. And then it becomes an option. So imagine in some dysfunctional way of thinking, it's like, okay, so this is a possibility. I know this person did it, so I do have this option. Good Christians do attempt and do complete suicide. There's a growing suicide rate among clergy. So again, go back to the first weeks of class when we talked about self-care. Self-care is not selfish. And in fact, it's very responsible. So even if you're of the mind that I need to suffer for Christ, which we do, we don't need to look for it, but we do need to take into account how that our lives impact others in ministry. Depression doesn't always result in suicidality. When I meet a new client and I start talking to them, and the first questions you say, first out of the gate, do you want to kill yourself? And you don't say, would you like to, have you thought of hurting yourself? No, you have to be very specific and say, have you thought of killing yourself? Have you thought of how you would do it? how, and this is what assist helps you with too. Or we have AMSR training for our students. It's a more advanced type of suicide training. Um, Either way, I think assist is going to be probably a more accessible training for you. But yeah, if you get a chance to do AMSR, especially if you decide to go into the counseling profession, it's great stuff. It's very, very practical, very useful. So when I'm talking with a client and I ask the question right out of the gate, well, I've thought about it, but I would never do it. So then you probe a little further and say, okay, tell me why. Oh, I could never do that to my children. Well, another answer could be, yes, I've thought about it, but I don't know. Okay, so you have children, right? Yeah, my kids would probably be better off without me. See the difference? Then you're able to dig into thinking, okay, well, then how would you do it? What would be the steps? What's the plan? Another myth, improvement does not mean the risk is over. In fact, as I mentioned before, suicide being a hope. If you notice someone who is very depressed, very withdrawn, or very uncharacteristically behaving in that regard, and then suddenly they seem to bounce back and they're happy and they're sort of engaging again. Do not take that as a sign that anything's better. This could be the moment when they said, okay, that's it. I'm going to complete suicide. Now I'm going to see my pain end. It actually instills hope. And so you can actually see an improvement in their behavior. Okay, watch for signs. So we'll get into those deeper into Wright, but an attempt is a sign. And it's a much higher completion rate of people who have attempted in the past. So if there's ever been a suicide attempt, now pay attention to how recent. If it's 20 years ago, okay, not as much a threat as a year ago, more intense 6 months ago, then this is when your radar really needs to be going up. A suicide threat. I might as well kill myself if I have to go continue living with this person. Okay. That's probably more of a hint than a threat, but you say, if you leave me, I'm going to kill myself. That's an abusive person's weapon, but you need to take it seriously, even if it's a manipulative statement to keep a partner from leaving. Suicidal activity, gathering objects that could be used to end their life. Suicidal symptoms, again, we talked about the depressed behavior, the withdrawal, giving away cherished items, and in fact, a sudden uplift in the mood. And look at what's going on in the person's life. Just as we do in trauma and crisis intervention, we're going to be looking at what's been going on in this person's life leading up to this. So looking at all those things. Okay, steps to help. Establish a relationship, maintain contact. Again, it's not a one and done, and build support. So again, look at maintaining connection, because remember, one of the huge factors is isolation, cut off from people. And we're going to see a whole lot more of this in the future. My boss, Tony Watkins, he's an AMSR trainer, and the research that he's quoting me is that when you're looking at a devastating event, there's not research on something as long as COVID has hung on, but 12 to 18 months after a catastrophic event like a natural disaster, an auto accident, those kinds of things, you've got the suicide rate spiking. So I don't know what that means for us in COVID, but what I do know is that we need to be vigilant. Unconditional positive regard. So What does this mean? Well, this is not the time to say, you shouldn't be living with that guy, or you've been using drugs, and this is no. It's you're not excusing bad behavior, you're just not going there. I know that your family loves you, and I want you to know that I truly admire your courage for even talking about this. This is amazing that you would be able to even talk about this. And there are things that we can do. There are things that we can plug you into. I will be here as much as I can. I want to see you whole. Now, bear in mind, it's about the pain first. So they're ambivalent about continuing to live with the pain they have. So you find their reason for not. And I have had cases where I don't know what would happen to my cat. So I'll take it, whatever it is. Whatever it is, you've got to find that thing that would make them stop. And you think, oh, for the kids, for the family, don't tell them they're going straight to hell. Scripture doesn't say that. At least we could get into a debate about that. But my understanding of the unforgivable sin is not suicide. Because if it were, then it's like, well, you're checking your boxes all through your life. You accept Christ. But if you don't check that last box before your last breath, oops. So that's not my understanding. You can put your debate in your essays or professor review. Okay, steps to help. Ask what hurts. What is the pain? Acknowledge that it means something. And they may say something that doesn't make sense to you at all, but remember, people behave in ways that make sense to them. And what hurts me might not hurt you. It may not be, say, oh, that's not that big a deal. Do not, by any means, minimize what they're experiencing. So being aware of the 3 H's. Hopelessness. There's no way this is ever going to change. It's just never going to get better. If you're talking about the death of a child, you can see this pain will never end. Yes, I understand that this is just excruciating. I can't imagine what it's like to be going through this. But just hang in and keep going. There are reasons to keep going. Find this. Helplessness. They feel powerless. I can't change my situation. I don't have any way to do that. Then there's haplessness, just deep sorrow. And that can be from depression, which is a brain issue, combined with circumstances. It can be completely medical. Sorrowful situations are just debilitating. We've already talked about this in the crisis and trauma sections. So sorrowful situations weigh so heavy, you almost can't breathe. Guard against your own biases. So, what you say you believe is irrational. There's a brain fog that's happening when we've got suicidal thinking, if there's depression. Remember the person that said, my kids would be better off without me. They're not thinking about, oh my God, they will be so devastated. Even if you don't have a good relationship with your kids, it's going to be horrifying. It's going to be terrible. So don't say, oh, that's crazy. That you can't dismiss what they're feeling, even if it is irrational, because that's where their brain's taking them right now. Helplessness. Now you might be irritated at their seeming to be needy. I can't change anything. He's, but I love him. He keeps, he keeps saying he's going to change. I don't know. Or are you going to call me tomorrow? What do you, I need a friend. Are you, okay? Yeah. Yeah, I'll be there for you. You also have to have boundaries, but this is, if you've got somebody who's banking on you being there to save their life, this is about referring. This is about getting them hooked up with resources and professional help. Haplessness. Um, you might say, well, if you hadn't turned your back on your toddler, they wouldn't have found the pool. You better shut that right down. That is not of God. No one would choose that, and everybody makes mistakes. Okay, identify the risk. So if there's an attempt, how lethal was it? Let me tell you something, hanging, there's not a lot of way out if nobody's around, and it's pretty quick. So I had a client whose son attempted suicide by hanging, and in just a matter of seconds, because she had texted him earlier, maybe just a few minutes. And when she got to the house, something told her to go to the basement, and there he was. He had already turned blue, and his face had started to swell. And this was in just the matter of minutes. That's very serious. When we're talking about a gun, not much coming back from that. Second is impression. How believable does that person see their means by which to kill themselves? Rescue, possibility of coordination with them, and other attempts to help. We're going to set up a phone chain. We're going to be checking on you. I've got your cousin's going to be calling you every 6 hours during the day. I'm going to be swinging by there in the morning. Set up a plan. And this in conjunction with getting them further help. Timing, the more recent the attempt, the greater the risk. We've already hit on that. 20 years ago, okay, at one time it was on their radar. 2 years ago, 6 months ago, okay. This is time to really step up. Okay. Identify, obtain information about, and clarify the problem. Look at some of the surrounding factors that may be contributors. Again, males complete suicide at a higher rate than females just because of the choices. Also, a little more impulsive behavior. Sorry, guys, but it's just fact. You can look it up. The history of suicidal behavior, the plan, how lethal, how available, how detailed, how far have they gone into this? What are the stress factors in their life? What are the symptoms and contributing factors? Look at the resources they have, although we've already said that isn't necessarily a deterrent. What's the lifestyle? Are we looking at somebody who isolates? Are we looking at somebody who engages in dangerous behavior in public? Maybe, part of a violent group, or drug use, or isolation. Communicate with others. How often are they in communication? And what are medical factors? If you're talking about a terminally ill person, well, that's completely different stakes right there. Formulate a plan to help. If they're calling you, do not let them promise they will. Do not let them promise they won't complete suicide before you hang up. Give them instructions and neutralize or complicate the suicide plan. What that means is, I know you have pills. Where are the pills? Okay, well, if you can't throw them out, then let's put them in a lockbox and put them in your attic. A gun, give them to your son and let him hold on to those for you. Those are the things to complicate the plan. Okay, I'm not going to tell you just throw out your medications. What I'm going to tell you is do this before you do anything, and you talk it out. But when you're on the phone with them, that's when you hopefully can pull up your computer, and I believe 911 is available online as well. Send somebody over. Determine positive resources and alternatives. This is where you send somebody over. Now, this is something I want you to pay close attention to. In Louisville Metro, we have at least one group of officers specially trained for mental health issues. They're called the Crisis Intervention Team, CIT. And I have actually made the phone call to say, okay, I need the crisis intervention team to go and check on this person. I've also instructed family members who have a suicidal or a person with a severe mental illness to send the crisis intervention team, ask for them. The 911 operator should know. Create a committed environment. Again, we're here for, you're not getting rid of us because we're staying with you. We're going to, well, you don't have to check on me every day. Well, guess what? We're going to until we get word otherwise. Maybe if it's a family member, get permission to attend therapy with them. The more people involved around this person, the better. So communicate your intentions. This is what we're going to do. And if we think you're involved in something that could end your life, I'm going to talk to your mom, or I'm going to involve the police, or, right? And these are the other people who are going to be surrounding you and caring for you. I want you to laminate the list of don'ts on page 320 of Wright and teach them to anybody who will listen. But once suicide has been completed, these are the steps to help. Break the news. You don't have to come in saying, your sister was found in the floor with a gun, blah, blah, blah. It's, your sister has passed and we think she completed suicide. Allow the extreme reactions. Remember, you're going to see a lot of the same behaviors that you saw that we talked about when someone has lost someone. But these are going to have a special sting because suicide in the mind of a loved one is partly their fault. And that's going to come with its own set of agony. Make sure the person you're informing is safe. Be prepared to be a verbal punching bag. Don't let them hit you unless you're trained in martial arts. But encourage the survivors to find support. Ongoing therapy. A lot of funeral homes have grief support groups, but I would encourage them to look for, talk to hospice, look for places that will actually have specifically sorry, just a second. Let me just pause for just a moment. My apologies. Okay. Okay. Uh, breaking the news, survivors of suicide. So I did attend a meeting of survivors of suicide. It was one of the most gut-wrenching things I have experienced, and the discussion there was, sorry, this is not helpful. Okay. So, attending the survivors of suicide meeting, there were two families represented there, plus the co-leaders had also lost a loved one to suicide. Uh, the the one family had the parents and the aunt of a young man who completed suicide. The other had another family member who had completed suicide. And what they talked about a lot was how people won't talk about their loved one, how it's almost a taboo. And in fact, they are at a place where they want to now be able to talk about the loved one. So keep those things in mind. Maybe initially um you're going to have people that just need silence. They just need to be, they just need your emotional presence. And this is where you want to try to beef up your skills in reading people and asking very simple, direct questions. Do you need time alone? I'm happy to be here, or whatever you need. Do you need a hug? Ask permission. Now, when you're breaking the news to a child, remember they're literal thinkers, and adolescents are going to ask hard questions. Family is going to have all kinds of reactions. If they're grounded in faith, you're going to hope that they turn toward each other. They could just as easily turn against one another. So, just be prepared. This is going to be the most difficult visit you're going to make. Be truthful, but simplify and limit your words. Again, less is more. When they say why, it's okay to say, I don't know. Okay. Know the tips on page 330 for the final exam. So I'm going to send this out to you guys today. My apologies for the interruptions on the main campus today. So I will complete the child and adolescent lecture for you by the end of the week. Thank you.